Why are there so many translations of the Bible?
Well, there really are a lot of them. In English alone, there are 450 translations of the Bible just in English. And of course, that's not counting all the other languages around the world that have translated the Bible. But first, it's important to recognize that it's out of necessity, because unless you're going to learn Hebrew and Greek and Aramaic, these are the three languages that the Bible was originally written in, then you're going to need a translation. And then the question is, all right, if you're going to translate the Bible, how are you going to do it? This is a question of philosophy. What is the philosophical approach that you're going to bring to translating the Bible? Because anytime you translate from one language into another, you have to ask yourself, do you want it to be very precise and exact? If you do that, that's great, but it might not be as readable. Or you can make it thought for thought. In other words, you're capturing the main idea. It's much more readable, but maybe it's not as precise in some of the meaning. And this introduces us to the task that every Bible translator is faced with. They have to ask themselves, do they want to err on the side of formal equivalency, which is a word-for-word translation of the Bible, or do they want to lean into what's called dynamic equivalency, which is not word for word, but now it's thought for thought. So you're capturing the essence of what the Bible translator said.
So are there more formal or dynamic equivalent translations when you look at all of them?
Well, if you take these Bible translations and put them out in a spectrum, you can see that on the formal equivalent side, this word-for-word translation, there's several that fit into this category. One of them would be the interlinear translation of the Bible, which is if you had interlinear translation of the Bible in Bible school, and it would have every Bible verse in Hebrew, and then right under it, it would have the English translation word for word. Now, I would read it, and the sentences didn't make much sense because they were structured word for word, not for an English reader, but according to the Hebrew. And then the same thing in the Greek. So an interlinear translation is word for word, very precise, but if you read that, it is very difficult to read. If you continue down the spectrum, you have translations like the NASB, the New American Standard Bible. It's a popular one in colleges, especially a generation ago, and it's very, very faithful, again, to the original words, but it's a little more readable than the interlinear translation. And then you have the ESV, English Standard Version. Again, very precise, trying to stay close to the original text, but much more readable. This is moving down the spectrum. And then maybe the last translation under formal equivalence, this word for word, very precise, is the King James Version. Famous, it's been out since 1611. It's a beautiful literary masterpiece, but today it's kind of difficult to read. So that's the formal equivalent side. Now, if you shift over to the other side of the spectrum, now we're getting into what's called the dynamic equivalence. And this is where it's thought for thought. You're not trying to be as precise as possible with the words, but you just want to capture the meaning. And you want to make sure it's readable to people. So these are translations that children and middle schoolers tend to read. A lot of new believers like to pick these up because they're very easy to pick up and read. One of them would be the Christian Standard Bible. So it tries to balance between the two of these, the word for word and thought for thought, but it's very readable. And then you'd have something like the New International Version. That's very popular. A lot of people use that. That was my Bible, when I was a teenager, and I carried that thing with me until I was in college. And then there's other translations like the New Living Translation, the Contemporary English, and these are not interested in a word for word translation, but they really want to just capture the big picture, the meaning in a particular verse, and then making sure that they translate it still close, to the words, but really they just want it to be readable. And that brings us into another area that's maybe off the spectrum of translation. These are the paraphrases of the Bible. These are Bibles that are not interested in the original Hebrew, the original Greek, but they'll take a translation like the ESV or the King James Version and then paraphrase that translation so that it's very readable. These tend to be done by one person, like the Message Bible,
right,
the Living Bible. These are translations paraphrases of the Bible that tend to be done by one person or a small group of people, and they're not as faithful to the original meaning of the Bible.
What if we read a couple verses to get an example?
Yes, I actually looked at a couple of scriptures. I think one that would be really helpful if you've got a Bible. ESV,
yeah, let's open up.
Romans chapter 12, verse 1. So what I want to do is give you a side-by-side comparison between the formal equivalence. I know I'm being very technical, but the formal equivalence, which is word for word, and then in a minute we'll read the dynamic equivalence. Okay. So formal equivalence, Romans 12:1. This is the ESV.
Yep, I have the ESV here. It says, I appeal to you therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship.
That's great.
Yeah, it's ESV. It's my favorite.
Yeah, I like that translation too. I read out of it as well. The issue with this is that it's very precise. It's capturing the words in the original Greek, but it's not as readable. You know, when you read that, it's a very familiar text to me, so it's very readable to me. But you don't really hear people talking like that. The other thing is, you'll notice the appeal is therefore to his brothers, right? That's what it says, to his brothers. This is going to be the New Living Translation of Romans 12:1. And this is going to be more of a thought for thought. You're going to notice that this is a little different from Romans 12:1 in the ESV.
Yeah, it says, and so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind he would find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him.
All right. So there's a number of things that jump out. Did you notice that?
Yeah, brothers and sisters.
Brothers and sisters. Sisters is not mentioned in the ESV because the ESV is trying to be faithful to the Greek.
Wow.
And in the Greek, there's no mention of the sisters. But when the New Living Translation was put together, they said, well, it's clear that he's addressing the whole church.
Right.
So why not include them in there?
Right.
Because it still captures the essence of what Romans 12:1 is about. It's not like he's speaking specifically to husbands or to fathers, but it's to men and women in general.
Church. Yeah.
So there they took some liberty and added sisters to the text. The other thing you'll notice there is that they took a passage and spread it out over 3 sentences. That helped to make it much more readable. There were 3 separate sentences in that one verse, whereas in the ESV, they condensed it and kept it to one verse, even if it was a little clunky as a sentence. So that's one example of just how it's much more readable to take the New Living Translation. That's why a lot of people like to read it. You know, it's early in the morning, they're just waking up. That's their favorite one to read in the morning because it's a devotional and they don't have to activate their brain quite as sharply. Whereas the ESV, if you really want to do a deep study and you really want to get to what does the Bible say about something, the ESV is the preferred translation.
Yeah. Are there any other reasons for multiple translations?
Yeah. One of them would be that there have been a lot of manuscripts that have been discovered just in the last couple hundred years that have really changed our understanding of how the Bible came about to be. For example, 200 years ago, even 100 years ago, the oldest text that we had, oldest manuscripts we had, original manuscripts or oldest ones, went back 1,000 years. In 1947, a shepherd boy discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls that went back another 1,000 years. So that gave us scriptures and manuscripts of the Bible that go back 2,000 years, literally to the time of Jesus Christ.
Wow.
It was an amazing find. There's another manuscript that was found in St. Catherine's Monastery in Egypt. And this also added to our understanding of the New Testament. It actually went all the way back to the 4th century. So 400 years after the time of Christ, we were finding a complete copy of the New Testament. So that also helped us to understand that some of these older translations of the Bible, like the King James Version, weren't quite as accurate as we thought they were. Because now we had manuscripts that were going back hundreds, even thousands of years to the time of Christ that really helped us to get a more accurate understanding of what the Bible looked like. Now we needed newer translations, more up-to-date translations of the Bible.
So do certain denominations of the church have a favorite translation they use?
Yeah, if you look at the Roman Catholic Church, for example, they have their favorite translation, the American Standard Bible. Then there's the Jehovah's Witnesses. They actually created their own translation called the New World Translation of the Bible. So certainly some denominations do have their preferred translation of the Bible. You know, another reason why we have these various translations is because audiences matter. You know, like if you're a college student, interlinear Bible, sure, you can read that. It's going to be helpful to you. I don't think most people are going to really find a lot of benefit from it. If you're a high school student, the ESV, you should be able to read out of that. It's designed for that age level. If you're in middle school, the New International Translation of the Bible, that's designed for a middle school kid. And then there's like the CES, the Common English Standard Version of the Bible. That's made for very young kids. So it depends on your audience too. You know, are you a little kid or are you an adult?
So do you think we'll just continue to see more translations written?
I do. Because the English language is continuing to change. The King James Version was printed in 1611. It's a beautiful literary masterpiece, but the English language has changed so much in the last 400 years that we have to update the Bible so that it reflects some of those changes, that people can still read and receive from the scriptures, because the Bible was meant to be read by regular people. You didn't need a college degree. You didn't need a special, Bible certificate to read and study the Bible. It is made to be read by even children. And that's why I think there will be, even in the coming years, there'll be translations that come out. Maybe we find new manuscripts that help us to understand the New Testament or the Old Testament better. And that's why I wouldn't be surprised if we see new translations.